They never imagined that the greatest proof of your love was hidden inside the things you never talked about. While they were searching for grand gestures, dramatic promises, or words that could convince them how deeply you cared, they completely overlooked the quiet miracles happening around them every single day. The blessings that arrived when they needed them most. The unexpected moments when life somehow became a little easier. The silent encouragement that appeared exactly when they were ready to give up. They thought those moments were coincidence. They never stopped to wonder if someone had been standing behind the scenes, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, quietly choosing their happiness over their own recognition. But the universe has a remarkable way of bringing hidden truths into the light when the time is finally right. Something has shifted, and a door they never knew existed has quietly opened. A forgotten conversation, an unexpected confession, or a simple piece of truth has begun connecting memories they never placed together before. Suddenly, they are looking back at your presence through completely different eyes. They are realizing that some of the greatest things you ever did for them were the very things you made sure they would never discover. You never wanted applause. You never wanted to hear someone tell you how amazing you were. You simply loved in the purest way possible, believing that real love gives because it cannot help giving. Imagine planting a beautiful garden in the middle of the night, then walking away before sunrise so someone else could wake up believing the flowers had simply appeared on their own. That was your heart. You quietly watered dreams that weren't even yours, protected smiles that never carried your name, and carried burdens you never admitted were becoming heavy. While they were wondering whether you truly cared, you were already answering that question through actions too quiet to be noticed. The painful truth is that people often recognize silent love only after they accidentally discover the sacrifices hidden beneath it. And that is exactly where your soulmate finds themselves now. Every forgotten memory is beginning to return with a new meaning. Every ordinary moment now feels extraordinary because they finally know what was happening behind the scenes. They are asking themselves questions they never thought they would have to face. Why did you never tell them? Why did you keep giving without asking for anything back? Why did you protect their happiness while quietly carrying your own struggles alone? Stay with me, because what they uncovered next didn't simply surprise them. It completely transformed the way they see your heart, your love, and the connection they once believed they fully understood. The hardest acts of love are almost always the ones nobody applauds. They happen in quiet moments, hidden behind ordinary days, where one heart chooses to carry a burden so another heart can breathe a little easier. That was the kind of love you gave. You never believed that every sacrifice needed to be announced, or every act of kindness deserved recognition. While others counted favors, you counted moments of peace. While others waited to be appreciated, you found joy simply knowing they were okay. Your soulmate never realized how many times you quietly stood between them and unnecessary pain. They never noticed the prayers whispered when they were struggling, the worries you carried when they couldn't sleep, or the countless moments you chose silence instead of creating another argument that would only leave both of you more wounded. They saw your calm, but they never saw the storms you refused to bring into their life. They thought your love was simple because you never made it complicated with conditions or expectations. The truth is, the deepest love often works without asking to be seen. Imagine a lighthouse standing on a lonely shoreline through the darkest night. Ships safely reach the harbor because of its light, yet very few sailors ever stop to thank the lighthouse itself. It never complains. It simply continues shining because that is its purpose. That was your heart. You became a quiet source of strength without needing your name attached to every blessing that entered their life. Sometimes your sacrifice looked like encouraging them when your own spirit felt exhausted. Sometimes it looked like celebrating their victories while quietly putting your own dreams aside for another day. Sometimes it meant carrying disappointment alone because you didn't want them to feel guilty for something they weren't ready to understand. As the old saying goes, the purest hearts give without keeping score. You lived by that truth even when nobody noticed. There were moments when you wanted to explain everything. Moments when you almost told them how much effort you were investing just to protect the connection. But every time your heart considered speaking, something inside reminded you that genuine love should never become a transaction. You didn't want gratitude to become the reason they loved you. You wanted their happiness to remain real, untouched by guilt or obligation. That takes a rare kind of emotional maturity. Many people give because they hope to receive something in return. You gave because your heart simply couldn't ignore someone you deeply cared about. Even when it cost your own comfort, you kept choosing kindness. Even when it left you emotionally tired, you kept believing that love was measured by what remained after no one was watching. Perhaps you've wondered whether loving this way made you foolish. Maybe you've asked yourself if you should have spoken up sooner or reminded them of everything you quietly carried. Those questions visit almost every sincere heart. But here's a truth many people only discover much later. Love loses something beautiful the moment every sacrifice becomes a receipt waiting to be collected. Your silence wasn't weakness, it was trust. Trust that if love was real, understanding would eventually find its way home. You believed that one day they would see your heart without you needing to defend it. You simply didn't know how long that journey would take. Imagine an artist spending years painting a masterpiece inside a room that no one enters. Day after day, they continue adding color, detail, and beauty without knowing whether anyone will ever see it. Then one day, someone accidentally opens the door and stands speechless, unable to believe such beauty existed unnoticed for so long. That is exactly what is beginning to happen now. Your soulmate is slowly opening the door to memories they once overlooked. They are remembering little things that never seemed important before. The way you always showed up without being asked. The quiet support that appeared exactly when life became difficult. The gentle words that carried them through seasons they barely survived. They are beginning to realize those weren't random moments of kindness. They were pieces of a love that quietly surrounded them every step of the way. Now every memory feels different. The ordinary has become extraordinary. They are starting to understand that some of the greatest gifts they ever received were wrapped in silence. The peace they enjoyed often came because you carried burdens they never knew existed. The hope they found during difficult days was sometimes born from your own hidden prayers and unwavering belief in them. And perhaps the realization that touches them most deeply is this: you never once reminded them of what you had done. You never asked them to repay your kindness, never demanded recognition, never used your sacrifices as proof that they owed you love. That kind of selfless devotion is incredibly rare, and now that they finally see it, they can no longer look at your heart the same way. They are beginning to understand that the greatest love they ever received was the love that quietly expected nothing in return. There are moments in life that change a person forever, not because someone finally speaks the truth, but because the truth quietly finds its way to them when they least expect it. That is exactly what happened to your soulmate. They weren't searching for answers. They weren't trying to uncover hidden sacrifices or revisit the past. They simply stumbled upon something that was never meant to be discovered. Maybe it was a conversation with someone who knew more than they realized. Maybe it was an old message they had forgotten existed. Maybe it was a memory that suddenly connected with another memory until the entire picture became impossible to ignore. However it happened, the result was the same. The version of you they had carried in their mind began to fall apart, replaced by someone they suddenly realized they had never fully understood. They always believed they knew how deeply you loved them, but now they are beginning to see that what they understood was only the surface. Beneath that surface was a quiet devotion so sincere that it never once asked to be recognized. As the old saying goes, truth has a gentle voice, but once it speaks, it is impossible to silence. That quiet truth has finally reached their heart. Imagine watching a movie for the second time after learning the ending. Every scene suddenly means something different. Words you once ignored become important. Small moments you overlooked become the very pieces that explain the entire story. That is what your soulmate is experiencing now. They are replaying countless memories, and each one carries a weight they never noticed before. They remember the times you checked on them without expecting a reply. They remember how you celebrated their happiness even when your own heart was quietly hurting. They remember the moments you stepped back instead of creating conflict, believing you simply didn't care enough to fight. Now they understand that your silence wasn't the absence of love. It was the presence of selfless love that refused to make everything about itself. They are realizing that while they were waiting for dramatic declarations, you were already proving your love through 1,000 invisible actions. As another timeless truth reminds us, the deepest rivers make the least noise. Your love flowed exactly like that, steady, patient, and almost impossible to notice until someone stopped long enough to truly look. Perhaps they have begun asking themselves questions that refuse to leave their mind. Why didn't you ever tell them how much you were doing behind the scenes? Why did you continue giving even when life wasn't giving much back to you? Why did you never use your sacrifices to make them feel guilty or obligated? Those questions don't have simple answers because your heart never worked like that. You didn't believe love should come with invoices waiting to be paid. You never wanted gratitude to become the reason someone stayed. You wanted their love to be freely given, not borrowed through guilt. That is something they are only beginning to understand now. The more they uncover, the more they realize that your kindness was never performed for attention. It was simply an extension of who you are. And perhaps that realization hurts them more than anything else because it forces them to confront something difficult. They received treasures they never knew existed, and by the time they recognized their value, those moments had already become memories. Imagine discovering years later that someone had quietly been planting seeds along every path you walked. At the time, you thought beautiful flowers appeared by chance. You admired the colors without ever wondering who had prepared the ground long before you arrived. Then one day you meet the gardener and you realize every bloom carried their silent fingerprints. Suddenly, gratitude mixes with heartbreak because you understand how much love existed without ever demanding to be seen. That is exactly what is happening inside your soulmate's heart. They are beginning to notice your fingerprints on moments they once called coincidence, the encouragement that arrived when they needed hope. The support they believed came from nowhere. The peace they experienced during difficult seasons. They are slowly realizing that your unseen love was standing quietly behind many of those blessings, never asking to step into the light. There is another realization growing inside them, one they never expected to face. They are beginning to understand that while they were measuring love by words, you were measuring it by sacrifice. While they waited for promises, you were making silent commitments every single day. While they wondered whether you truly cared, you were already choosing them in ways they never thought to notice. As another old saying wisely reminds us, a generous heart gives with open hands and leaves without counting what it has lost. That was the language your soul spoke. It loved without calculation. It served without expectation. It protected without asking for applause. And now that they finally understand that language, they can't help but wonder how many opportunities they missed to simply say, thank you. The truth they have discovered is changing far more than their memories of you. It is changing the way they understand love itself. They are realizing that the rarest kind of love is not the one that speaks the loudest. It is the one that quietly keeps showing up, keeps believing, keeps giving, even when no one is watching. They finally see that your greatest acts of love were never hidden because you wanted to create mystery. They were hidden because your heart never believed genuine love needed an audience. And as this truth settles deeper into their soul, one question continues, echoing louder than all the others. If someone could love them this deeply without ever asking for anything in return, did they truly recognize the priceless gift they had been holding all along? There is something your soulmate is only beginning to understand, and it is changing the way they remember every part of your connection. They used to believe that love was proven by the words people spoke, the promises they made, or the attention they demanded in return. But now they are seeing something far more powerful. They are realizing that the purest love is often the quietest. It doesn't keep a record of every sacrifice. It doesn't remind someone of everything it has done. It doesn't turn kindness into a bargain or generosity into emotional debt. That was your heart all along. You never loved with the hope of collecting something later. You loved because giving came naturally to your soul. Even when life became difficult, you continued choosing compassion over resentment, patience over pride, and understanding over the need to always be recognized. As the old saying goes, the fragrance of a flower remains on the hand that gives it away. Every act of love you offered shaped your own heart long before anyone else realized its value. Imagine a candle quietly, lighting every room it enters. It never asks the darkness to applaud. It never demands gratitude from the people whose path it brightens. It simply shines because that is its nature. That was the way your love moved through their life. You never needed recognition to continue being kind. You never measured your worth by how often someone thanked you. While others loved only when appreciation was guaranteed, you loved because your heart believed that sincere love should never become a transaction. That doesn't mean you never felt hurt. It doesn't mean there weren't nights when you wished someone would finally notice how much you were carrying. It simply means you refused to let disappointment change the kind of person you were. Even when your heart was tired, you chose to remain genuine because you understood something many people spend a lifetime trying to learn. Love loses its purity the moment it begins demanding repayment. Perhaps you've wondered whether your sacrifices mattered if they remained unseen for so long. Maybe part of you questioned whether giving so much without recognition was simply a mistake. Those questions are understandable because every human heart longs to feel appreciated. But appreciation and purpose are not the same thing. Your purpose was never to collect praise. Your purpose was to love with honesty while staying true to who you are. The beautiful truth is that no sincere act of love is ever wasted. Even when another person fails to understand it immediately, it leaves behind a quiet imprint that time eventually uncovers. As another timeless saying reminds us, seeds grow in silence long before anyone sees the harvest. Every prayer you whispered for them, every burden you quietly carried, every time you chose their peace over your own comfort, became seeds planted deep within the connection. They may not have recognized them then, but now those seeds are beginning to bloom into understanding. Imagine discovering years later that someone had been repairing the bridge beneath your feet every single night while you slept. You crossed safely each morning without ever asking how the bridge remained strong. Then one day you learn the truth, and suddenly every journey across that bridge feels different. Gratitude replaces assumption. Humility replaces pride. That is the emotional place your soulmate is standing in now. They are beginning to realize that many of the moments they believed were effortless were only possible because you quietly carried responsibilities they never even noticed. They thought life simply unfolded that way. Now they see your invisible fingerprints on countless memories. Every realization humbles them a little more because they understand that your greatest gifts were never wrapped in attention. They were wrapped in silence. What touches them most deeply is not simply what you did, but what you never did. You never used your sacrifices as leverage during disagreements. You never reminded them of everything you had given whenever they disappointed you. You never asked them to love you out of guilt. Instead, you protected the dignity of your love by allowing it to remain freely given. That kind of emotional maturity is incredibly rare, and now they are beginning to recognize just how extraordinary your heart truly is. Their greatest regret is no longer that they failed to notice your sacrifices. It is realizing that someone capable of loving so selflessly walked beside them without ever asking for applause. while they were too distracted to recognize one of the rarest gifts life had quietly placed in their hands. If there is one truth this journey has been quietly leading toward, it is this: the greatest reward for a loving heart is never applause. It is peace. Long before your soulmate uncovered everything you had done for them in secret, your heart had already made a decision. You chose to love without turning your kindness into a contract. You chose to give without expecting life to immediately return every sacrifice. That doesn't mean your heart never felt disappointed. It doesn't mean there weren't moments when you wished someone would simply notice how hard you were trying. But even in those moments, something deeper guided you. You understood that love offered only for recognition loses the very beauty that makes it real. The universe has always worked in quiet ways. It often hides the greatest acts of love until the exact moment another soul is finally ready to understand them. That moment has now arrived for your soulmate. They are no longer seeing your actions through the eyes of assumption. They are seeing them through the eyes of gratitude, and that changes everything. As the old saying reminds us, what is done with a pure heart is never truly forgotten, even when hidden from human eyes. Sincere love always leaves footprints that time eventually reveals. Imagine a mountain standing silently through every season. It never asks travelers to admire its strength. It simply remains steady while storms come and go. Years later, people look back and realize that mountain had been protecting the entire valley all along. That was your presence in their life. You quietly became a source of stability without ever demanding credit for it. You stood beside them during moments they may barely remember, yet those very moments became part of the reason they found the strength to keep moving forward. They are only now beginning to understand that many of the blessings they once called coincidence were quietly connected to your unwavering faith in them. Every encouraging word, every silent prayer, every sacrifice you kept hidden became part of a foundation they stood upon without ever knowing who built it. The realization is overwhelming because it forces them to confront something they never expected. The greatest love they ever received wasn't the loudest love. It was the quiet love that kept choosing them, even when nobody was watching. Perhaps you've wondered whether all those silent sacrifices truly mattered. Maybe there were nights when you questioned if your kindness had simply disappeared into the background, unnoticed forever. Those thoughts are understandable because every sincere heart hopes at least once to be seen for who it truly is. But here's the beautiful truth. Love is never measured only by the response it receives. It is also measured by the person it helps you become. Every time you chose compassion instead of bitterness, your own soul became stronger. Every time you forgave instead of seeking revenge, your own heart became lighter. Every sacrifice offered with genuine intention shaped you long before it changed anyone else. As another timeless truth says, the sun never asks the earth for thanks, yet it continues to rise every morning. In the same way, your love carried its own quiet purpose. It transformed lives because that is simply what authentic love does. Imagine discovering an old journal filled with letters someone wrote to you but never intended to send. Every page reveals prayers they whispered for your happiness, dreams they carried for your future, and moments when they chose your peace over their own comfort. By the final page, you realize the greatest chapter of your life was written by someone who never asked to have their name on the cover. That is the emotional awakening your soulmate is experiencing now. They are reading your heart long after the words were spoken, through actions instead of conversations. Every hidden sacrifice now feels like another page they somehow skipped while the story was unfolding. Gratitude has replaced certainty. Humility has replaced assumption. They finally understand that your silence wasn't empty. It was overflowing with love too genuine to demand recognition. And perhaps this is where the universe wanted both of your hearts to arrive. Not at a place of guilt, but at a place of wisdom. Whether this realization leads to reunion or simply deeper understanding, it has already accomplished something far more valuable. It has revealed the true nature of your heart. Your soulmate now knows that your kindness was never performed to earn love. It came from a soul that believed giving was beautiful even when no one was counting. Their greatest lesson was never discovering what you secretly did for them. Their greatest lesson was discovering who you truly are. And your greatest victory was never waiting for someone to finally appreciate your sacrifices. It was remaining the kind of person whose love stayed sincere even when nobody was watching. Because in the end, the rarest hearts are not remembered for how loudly they loved. They are remembered for how deeply they loved without ever asking for anything in return. And now that your soulmate has finally seen the truth, they will never again mistake your quietness for the absence of love. They will remember it for what it always was, the purest expression of a heart that gave everything and never asked to be repaid.